So everyone, I guess, give a big round of applause for Albert, and we'll begin. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and good evening to everyone. I would like to expect that some information here is familiar for you. When we'd be talking to you related to technical information, I probably would attempt to go quickly and focus more on our program rather than technical or engineering topics, because I bet you're expert at this point and probably know even better than I do. But without further ado, let's see how we're going to do time-wise here, because I have quite a bit of slides here, but I'll try to stick with my time, and I hope I should be done by probably 6:50 at least. So everyone probably attending this webinar is aware of potential big earthquake from Cascadia Subduction Zone. Actually, it wasn't until recently that Oregonians were aware of this or heard about the potential of big earthquake striking along the coastline of the Pacific. And here's a little chart of that shows the previous earthquakes and timelines. And the last one has happened over 300 years ago, January 26th. Probably have heard how this was captured or documented. It wasn't Americans that noted or documented this earthquake, but instead it was Japan, based on tsunami waves that hit Japan coastline a day after. And since they didn't feel an earthquake, and they kind of explored and kind of learned that this tsunami came from a Cascadia that struck here on our coastline. And based on this histogram here, big earthquakes, magnitude 8 or higher, are expected to be roughly between 300 and 500 years interval. And here is a shake map that was produced by Dokami. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the shake map from Japan earthquake back in 2011. And here's the expected ground shaking from Cascadia, which actually is going to be felt not only in Oregon, but even Washington and British Columbia. And you see there's a good similarities between these two maps. And so we'll see, or we'll experience the same thing that what Japan experienced back in 2011. But because of the age of our infrastructure, probably will be impacted even more than Japan. And here in the right corner of the screen is one of many historic bridges that we have along our coastal highway 101. These are very unique bridges, most of them registered to our as a historic structures. They perform very well for our lifeline, life loads, but they are very vulnerable to seismic loads. They are very brittle and don't have reinforcement. Foundations are, in most cases, on lithofabric layers. So tsunami is going to be another hazard that's going to impact or kind of damage these bridges or actually demolish. So if we go back and kind of check on the history of our seismic design specification that we use for highway bridges, probably from this chart, you'll be able to realize right away that for a long time, we ignored the seismic loads on the bridges. In late 60s, we started designing for 6% of dead weight on horizontal direction. And these, in most cases, this was equal or even less to to the wind loads some of the structures were experiencing back then. In early 80s, we doubled this. We went to 12%. Still was not quite close to the seismic loads that our structures are expected to see. In 1983, we adopted the Federal Highway special provisions for seismic, and we designed our bridges for no collapse criteria for a 500-year earthquake return. And it wasn't until 2003 when we adopted the 2002 seismic hazard maps, and these were based on a 1,000-year return period for no collapse criteria. And actually, once we did this, once we adopted this 1,000-year earthquake return for no collapse criteria, we kept the 500 years for our serviceability criteria. So at this point, we started designing bridges for performance level design criteria. So those bridges were meant to be operational after 500-year earthquake. 2009, we adopted the seismic design guide specifications, which now shift from force-based design to displacement-based design. So since 2009, we are designing our bridges using displacement-based design. Here's a little history of our seismic vulnerability assessment over the years, and the history when we started designing for seismic. Like I said, in 1990, when we really started designing for seismic. And once we started designing for seismic, we realized, actually, let me go back on that previous slide here. I forgot to mention here that please pay attention to this kind of green line here, which represents the cumulative percentage of a bridge inventory that was built over the years. So we said we started design for seismic here in 1990. And you see that 80% of the bridges already being built up to that point. So those deemed to be vulnerable at this point. I mean, it's no question about it. Even some bridges that were built before 2002 deemed to be vulnerable because liquefaction and loss spreading was not included in design specs up to 2003. So you see here a lot of studies, a lot of evaluations, and like I said, once we started designing for seismic, our highway bridges, we went back and assessed our bridge inventory, all bridges that were built before 1990, and wanted to kind of have a feeling how many of those bridges would still be able to take some seismic loads. Probably you already know that single-span bridges most generally perform very well for seismic, unless they have tall abutments or are sitting on liquefiable soils or are prone to a lot of spreading. In old days, we used to have a lot of culverts. We expect the culverts also to perform well unless the soils are very poor. But even if the soil will be very poor, if we have single cell culverts, probably it would kind of settle a little bit, but we expect to be able to cross those locations with just a little minimal mitigation after the fact. So we hired a consultant to do a seismic vulnerability assessment of our bridge inventory, and they evaluated over 2,500 bridges, and most of them, it was not surprised that most of them would appear to be vulnerable. Almost 1,700 bridges found to be seismically deficient. And we came up with a cost estimate that we would mitigate the vulnerabilities. And actually I have to mention here that still we weren't able to capture here the need for mitigating the liquefiable soils or loud spreading or poor soils in general. So the this cost was only to address the vulnerability of structural components. At the same time, we tried to identify some lifeline routes that we would focus on mitigating for seismic vulnerability. Back then, no segment was deemed to be resilient. All bridges were, or all highway segments were vulnerable because even if we had a bridge that was recently built, it was between bridges that were built ways years ago, and they were going to be vulnerable. But I want you to just take one thing from this image here. You see that we have 3 priorities, and the idea was that we're going to focus on priority 1, and once we mitigate all bridges in priority 1, we'll focus on priority 2 and 3. But you see there is no connection or no connectivity along the priorities here. So you can build, you can focus on priority 1, but this segment will not serve the purpose or the intent that this map was developed for. So you cannot use this to connect with the rest of the state if you just focus on these individual placed or individually selected segments. Moving forward, in 2009, we hired Portland State University to reevaluate once again the seismic vulnerability of our bridges based on ground shaking induced specifically from Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake. So that's why we instead now select an entire state as part of our model. We select only the western part of our state to be included in this model. And we were focused only on state-owned bridges only. And actually our main concern was the highway one of I-5 corridor. We used the RETROFIT model for this. It's a computer-based program. Actually, initially was used for just very small models, county-based or city-based. Portland State kind of pushed the boundaries this time. They contacted developers and kind of increased the capacity of this program to include more or big chunk of our state. And were several bridges, almost 1,500 bridges were included in this model. We did not include the bridges that were crossing our lifelines or our I-5 corridors. Instead, we were focused on bridges that were carrying the main highways. So each bridge was represented by the Fujio curves, and the program itself was able to develop the shake map for 3 Cascadia scenarios. This is a 9.0, and we had 8.3 south and 8.3 north. And we had a couple of crustal events as well included in this model. We went back, I mean, a few years after we developed this model. Once the shake maps for Cascadia became available, we went back and compared to the shake map that was produced by the RETROFIT, and we saw that those kind of match pretty well. The ground shaking has the same values. You see here, 0.44 or 0.48, that's what we have here. So it was a pretty good match. So we were excited or kind of happy with the results of RETROFIT model. So that's what RETROFIT model gave us. A map with damaged states for bridges based on 4 categories. We have slide, moderate, extensive, and collapse. For this particular model here that was related to 9.0 Cascadia Subduction Zone, just for the western part of the state, we had 6 bridges to be collapsed or expected to be collapsed, 64 extensive damage, 106 moderate, and 164 slide. We put a price tag on to retrofit these bridges, and it came up with about $1 billion to just retrofit these bridges. In the meantime, we were interested about the losses in the for the traveling public. What would be the impact to the traveling public if these bridges will go down, or the highways will be closed just because the bridge damage? For this particular scenario, the travel time losses were estimated at about $177 million. So we compiled all this information, and with some other information that was based on some algorithms that we developed in-house for assessing vulnerability of other bridges that were not included in this model. And we summarized the results on the seismic vulnerability report that was published back in 2009. Once we did that, we wanted to reevaluate our lifeline routes because we were not happy with the previous lifeline routes because disconnectivity. And actually, we haven't done anything. We haven't made any improvement on those lifeline routes because we never received seismic mitigation funds. So we pretty much were back in square one because every single segment needed some attention. I mean, we haven't been able to mitigate a lot of bridges for seismic vulnerability, although we have addressed some, what do you call it, phase 1 seismic retrofit. So if our program included seismic retrofit, if we had to go to the bridges for other reasons, if we had to do some strengthening or some rehabilitation work on existing bridges, and we included small seismic retrofit work, which was mainly focused on connecting superstructure to substructure. And in most cases, this was very inexpensive because we already had contractor up there doing work. So putting some cables or some shear lugs on abutments was deemed to be inexpensive. So that's what we did on very limited bridges because we were very limited funds. So we went back now on drawing board, and we wanted to reevaluate our bridges. But definitely at this point, we wanted to have connectivity. We wanted to have segments that we go from north, south, east, west, interactive. And this time around, we set goals and we set objectives. So we focused on regional mobility, not local access, like I mentioned. And we wanted to enable our emergency responders right after the earthquake, immediately after the earthquake, to go to the people in need or to isolate areas that probably will have some casualties or people that probably have been hurt from this very severe earthquake. And even at this time, still, we wanted to focus only on the state highways. We kind of minimize the scope of work. We thought it would be, we'd get lost if we wanted to have wider scope of work. So let's start with little and kind of expand once we mitigate these corridors, and we can expand from there. So we have the goals and we have objectives. And in other words, the goals were to support survivability and emergency response effort immediately following the earthquake. This is a pretty tough task, but it's something that our citizens have been asking for. I mean, they are aware of this hazard that is knocking our door and it's going to strike probably any day now. I hope we can wait till we get through the pandemic, COVID-19. But it's a pretty serious situation, so we're not taking this slightly. We want to provide transportation facilities that are critical to life support functions on interim period after the earthquake. So it's not just sending ambulances and getting all the people out of the harm's way, but at some point we have to help our economy kind of reboot and start generating products and getting our economy going. And long-term statewide recovery as well. I mean, we know it's going to take years and years. Like I said, picture for Oregon is going to be much worse than the image we saw in Japan. So it's going to take decades here before our economy becomes back to normal. So rescue, relief, recovery, said otherwise. So that's what I wanted to accomplish with our lifeline routes, or if those lifeline routes will become resilient. So here's a screenshot at a map that depicts the our 3-tier seismic lifeline routes. The heavy blue is tier 1, and we have tier 2, kind of complement tier 1, and tier 3 reach out to more areas, or kind of it's necessary to complete those 3 goals that we have set ourselves. Once we did this, we went back and we estimated that the cost to not only mitigate this the vulnerable bridges, but also to address the unstable slopes and rock falls. Because we realized that mitigating, just focusing on bridges would not get us anywhere. As you know, Valley is full of active slides and some major inactive slides for now, but it doesn't take much ground shaping to activate those. And those are major. They would kind of impact our highway corridors, especially the ones that connect I-5 to the coast communities. In 2013, we published the findings on seismic, if I go back for a second. So it was a seismic option report. Later on, once we did that, we realized that we were missing something. If we went back to old bridges and just focus on seismic vulnerabilities and ignore other deficiencies that bridges, most of our bridges have, this wasn't smart investment. So we realized this, and we wanted to recapture all other needs that our existing bridges might have beside the seismic vulnerabilities. Some have deficiency, load deficiencies, locating deficiencies, and some needed some upgrades, or some actually weren't deemed to be feasible for seismic upgrades. I mean, they were very old bridges, and just retrofitting wasn't a smart investment to retrofit an old bridges that were beyond the service life. So putting this in numbers and trying to address all what I just mentioned, we came up with 138 bridges that need to be replaced because not only seismic deficiencies, but other deficiencies as well. 390 bridges deemed to be feasible for retrofit. So we can retrofit and still preserve these bridges. 190 bridges were those that they had some major deficiencies, they needed to be captured besides retrofit. And we had resilience of landslides and other faults. And we tried to put costs on all this work and came with about to roughly $5 billion. Probably it's more now because this is 2012 cost data. So now we're 8 years later, the inflation need to be added and some other modifications as well. So now we know how much it's going to cost, but is that wide investment? I mean, do you want to invest more than $5 billion in this whole infrastructure? And what is the return? So we developed this economic model here to see the impact or the cost benefit of this investment. So if we had done nothing, if we ignore or waited, procrastinated to retrofit these bridges, the impact on our transportation alone, not any other business or casualties or even the bridge inventory itself, but just in transportation would be $350 billion. So $5 billion compared to $350 billion. Now, if we mitigate only bridges in tier 1 of lifeline routes, we would be able to reduce the losses by $35 billion. And so on. If we do tier 1 and tier 2, we have $55 billion saving. Now, if we mitigate the entire lifeline route corridors, we'd be able to reduce the economic losses by $84 billion. So 5 billion to 84 billion. So it's a 1 to 16 the cost benefit ratio. So it's a pretty good return on our investment. Now, why we couldn't save all $350 billion? Well, other bridges that will go down that are outside our lifeline routes and will have also impact on transportation. So at the same time, the news about Cascadia Subduction earthquake being a real threat for Oregon got attention of our legislatures as well, not only of our engineers and transportation management. So in 2013, actually it was 2013 we published this, but in 2012, legislature asked OSPAC, which stands for Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Commission, to perform an assessment of our entire state, assess the vulnerability of the entire state in our economy, and propose some mitigation scenarios. So we're 169 experts that volunteered for a full year, and these volunteers were divided on 8 subcommittees, and one of the subcommittees was the transportation subcommittee, which was led by ODOT. So we were sort of a lead of that transportation subgroup. Members of the transportation subgroup were from rail, air, water transportation, public transit, and of course from highway transportation as well. We had reps from local agency, we had a lot of help from consultants and academia as well. We tried to not only assess vulnerabilities along different transportation modes, but we wanted to see if we can cooperate or if we can create a multi-modal transportation network to respond to this big event. What we found out though was the other modes of transportation were actually in a more severe situation than highway transportation. Probably you've heard the railroad bridges are very vulnerable to seismic. Those I don't think they were ever designed for seismic, but most of the multi-span bridges, railroad bridges, are comprised of multiple single span or simply supported structures. So those cannot perform well under seismic. But one takeaway that was very helpful being or participating in this this project was to see or to get a feeling how our state is prepared to respond to such a big event, knowing that all transportation modes have a lot of vulnerabilities at this point, and you wouldn't be able to drive car or ride a train or anything like that for a long time. But there is a plan. Probably you've heard that Redmond will be our main hub for receiving emergency supplies after such a big event. From there, the idea was to have these supplies moved to Valley with fixed wings aircraft. And from there will be helicopters because all the airports along the coastline would be damaged beyond the use of fixed wing aircraft, so they're not able to land on coastal airports for a long time. Now this will take for a long time. I mean, if we operate this way, yeah, it's going to take a long time to get the people in need, which mostly will be located along our coastline. So it would be great if transportation mode would be open, if we can have some highways open, at least start connecting from Redmond Airport and moving goods and emergency supplies to western part of the state. So that's why we prioritize our lifeline routes on 5 phases. So we definitely wanted to start our mitigation program from east moving west. But the connection point or the starting point would definitely be a Redmond Airport because it didn't make sense to focus mitigating our highways that connect to our coast communities for 2 reasons. Because they are more expensive to mitigate, because they have a lot of vulnerable bridges that are very costly to mitigate. But on top of that, they have a lot of landslides as well in comparison to our highway segments close to the Cascadia Range here. And another reason would be that even if you open this, let's say you work and open these highway segments, you can't connect anymore. I mean, still the rest of the western Oregon will be isolated. So that's why we focused on investing on segments that are relatively cheaper. You can open more segments for less dollars. And we wanted the US 97 to be as sort of our backbone here as in case I-5 corridor would be impassable after such a big event. So you see in the map, we have program phase 1, 2, 3, 4. The phase 5 comprised is a compilation of 12 bridges that are very expensive to replace. Some are located in coastal communities and some are elsewhere, but are some significant bridges that we can't retrofit, but we have to replace. So here is the phase 1 where we are currently working. We have currently received some seismic funds from the House Bill 2017. It's the first time that ODOT has received funds that are specifically allocated for seismic retrofit and mitigation. Now, when Rogue Valley heard that our program intended to focus initially on Highway US 97 and Oregon 58, they were concerned. They there would be a long time before it would reach to their community. And probably you have heard that earthquake scenarios are the most possible Cascadia scenarios. So it would be a 9.0, which is full rupture. It would go from northern California all the way to British Columbia. But it can be 8.3 scenarios, which could be sort of a southern merging or northern merging. So it can be one here in the southwest of Oregon, actually has been assessed as the most probable scenario for the next one. So it has a higher likelihood of occurring compared to the 9.0. So definitely the Rogue Valley here in Medford area is probably higher risk compared to the rest of the state. So since we already had started investing in US 97, we wanted to do something about this community here. So instead, focusing on I-5, which was very costly to mitigate, we start evaluating or assessing a triage approach for this community. The triage approach means that we try to find detour routes around our vulnerable bridges by using local streets or even state-owned highways when even if those segments were totally resilient or had just small vulnerabilities that could be addressed quickly or were inexpensive to address. And we were able to accomplish that task for the Rogue Valley community, and actually the entire cost to reach out to Rogue Valley through these triage routes was 1/10 of the cost estimated for retrofitting bridges along the I-5 corridor. So because of that, we went to the legislature. Actually, this is kind of a main project in House Bill 2017. So we already got money for investing on these triage routes and reaching out to Rogue Valley. So this is how the triage approach looks like. So here's the I-5 corridor, and you see we have 4 bridges here that are very costly to retrofit because those usually bridges carrying interstate highways are much wider than the rest of the bridges and much longer. And retrofitting those bridges is very costly. And sometimes you have to kind of put costs for just mitigating the traffic. I'm sorry, and so it adds up pretty quickly. Now instead, focusing on these 4 bridges, we would focus on this detour route here going along the Highway 99W and getting back to I-5 once we pass these one of the bridges. And we have few structures here, but likely for this scenario, those are old culverts and are expected to perform well under the seismic ground shaking. So here is a map showing the landslide for Oregon 58, US 97, which were priority 1, and for I-5 and I-140, US 140 here, are several major landslide and rock falls. But we try to focus only on a major landslide that cannot be easily mitigated after the fact, that will have long impact on highways, and ignore for now rock falls because the idea is that we can't easily remove those out of the highways as long as they don't have any impact on our bridges. So here's an active landslide, which actually is active as we speak. So imagine what is going to happen after a deep earthquake. It's on the highway Oregon 58 is close to one of our structures. And here's a LiDAR view of that bridge, and you see how much this has moved over the years. And actually, there's a little creek here that's been pushed and changed the flow over the years just because this active slide. And it's pretty costly to mitigate. But like I said, we have decided to ignore the rock falls for now, except if they will have impact on bridges. And here is one scenario where we have this area with rocks that are pretty loose and often kind of fallen on highways and are very prone to earthquakes. Now, why we want to mitigate this upfront is because we have this viaduct here, and the impact of this rock falls would be very severe to our structure, and our structure will not be able to take this additional load. So this will collapse if we don't address this prior to an earthquake. Because of the very promising result that we discovered with triage approach for the rock valley, we wanted to entertain these opportunities for the rest of our state by reaching out to our counties and asking them to evaluate their local highway inventory and see if they can find detour routes around our vulnerable bridges. And if those detours will have minor or would need minor investment to become resilient, or we'll compare that to the cost that we will save by bypassing our state bridges. So in this scenario, which is developed by Tillamook County, which was one of our pilot projects, you see the highway. If we wanted to invest in Highway 101, which is kind of the main coastal route for Oregon, just with these small areas here, we have two major structures. They needed to be replaced because they are not feasible for a seismic RFE. And we had to invest at least $6 million to replace these two bridges. And here's another one here, which is even much costlier than this area too. So we're talking about over $10 million to just replace these two bridges. But by following this detour here, we'll be able to connect from this point, let's say this point A to this point B, and save over $10 million. Now we have a little bridge here that needs some attention, but this bridge has been estimated to require about $300,000 for some small seismic RFE. So it's a huge saving. And once we did this exercise with a couple counties, Tillamook and Linn, we reached to other counties, and now we're working with all counties West Cascades to do this exercise and try to identify detour routes along our vulnerable bridges. And in some scenarios, we'd be willing to invest state highway funds on their local streets if those become a good or viable tour for our vulnerable bridges. Here's another snapshot from Linn County at this point, which has concluded their project and has provided the report or submitted the report to us. And you see several bridges here along the Interstate 5, but there is a good detour, a viable detour that can be used to bypass these vulnerable bridges. So for now, because our seismic funds are very limited, we will not be able to mitigate or to retrofit every single bridge on our main state highways, but instead we're focused now on detour routes that are able to carry or to handle enough traffic, but especially the emergency responders. So, probably you already know it's not going to be although the highway or the capacity of our highways after the earthquake will be limited, but so will be the traffic. I mean, we're not going to see the same traffic on highways immediately following such a big event like Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake. Mainly because the liquid fuel. So there's not going to be a liquid fuel available for public to travel from house to their work or vice versa. But because the liquid fuel is stored on a very, very vulnerable location up in Portland, the liquid fuel depot is along the river and is a country liquefaction. So as I said, we had all counties, we have contacted all counties west of the Cascade to kind of help us with starting their highway highway inventories and propose detour routes for our vulnerable bridges. We have, at this point, we have 5 counties that have completed their studies and have submitted reports, the studies that are being covered. A few other counties have their projects on the way. We have other counties that we have initiated our conversation with them, but the COVID kind of slowed us down. So initially we planned to finish this project with this study this past summer, but obviously now it's going to wait probably a few more months till we get back up to speed and finish this exercise with the rest of our state. And once we have reports from individual states, we'll compile that to a statewide report, and we'll go back to the legislature and kind of introduce another demand for funds. Now, 2 are the main goals that we want to accomplish with these studies. So we have told our counties to reevaluate the county's emergency transportation routes by taking into consideration established connection from critical facilities and counties populated areas to the ODOT lifeline routes, because now they know what we intend to invest. So it's pretty clear that we're not investing outside our seismic lifeline route. So our focus is on the seismic lifeline route. So with that being known at this point, counties want to go back and evaluate their ETRs and see how they can use or take advantage of our lifeline routes and connect to them. And like I said earlier, the second goal was for counties to propose 2 routes for our vulnerable bridges. In the meantime, since it was clear to us that we wouldn't be able to mitigate all our vulnerable bridges anytime soon, it's going to take decades till we will be able to address the vulnerabilities. We are focused on a post-earthquake inspection effort. So we want to be ready. We know that we're going to have our hands full. Will be thousands and thousands of bridges that need our attention right away, but we have limited sources. So at this point, we're trying to program or we have a plan in hand how we're going to tackle this issue. It's going to be a pretty severe issue, but if we prepare and kind of take advantage of this time till the next one hit, we'd be a much better situation, and we can respond much better. So besides training our first responders, our maintenance workers and our bridge inspectors for how they would evaluate and priorities, we are trying to incorporate the computer programs that are available to aim or to kind of help us for this effort. And one of the programs that has been introduced lately to us has been the SHAKECAST. Probably you already have heard about SHAKECAST. What it does is kind of takes the shake maps produced from USGS immediately after a seismic event and overlay those shake maps to our bridge vulnerabilities. So bridges are represented by fragility curves. So the shake maps will be able, or the program will be able to read for each bridge location the expected ground shaking. So the PGA or at the 1 second. And by overlapping this over the fragility curve for that particular bridge, we'll be able to tell us the expected damage state. So expected damage state now will be converted to priority inspection order. So the higher expected damage state, the higher is inspection priority order. So this is a little sample that was given to us or developed by USGS for us just to exercise, to use as exercise for this program. So as you see here, this is related to a 6.8 Mount Angel scenario, and you have several bridges that will be damaged, starting from minor damage all the way to collapse, and you see 15 bridges are expected to collapse. And definitely our inspection priority would be focused on those bridges first, and once we be able to clear those up, we'll be following the bridges down the list. Lately, we have developed seismic implementation policy and design guidelines. So since we sort of deviated a little bit from our initial scope of work, so we're not focusing now necessarily only on the bridges they are carrying on lifeline routes, but instead we are open to invest on bridges outside of lifeline routes as long as they provide viable detours to our vulnerable bridges. We want to have sort of a good directions how we're going to tackle this, so it would be not confusion. It would be in what scenarios a detour would be considered as a viable detour or cost effective, and what capacity or minimum capacity, traffic capacity, would a detour need to be provided in order to be considered as a viable detour. So I think at this point we're set up very, very well to move forward, and even with our limited funds, we are very optimistic that at some point we will establish a resilient transportation network that will at least will be able to serve our emergency responders immediately after an earthquake. And with that, here's a little picture of one of our bridges that we just retrofitted. So we finished the retrofit on the US 97. So you see here is a new column, new shaft, new column. It's a super band because it was impossible to mitigate the existing footings or the existing substructure. Probably you know now, if you see a picture, you probably realize that this poor column here is going to be hit pretty hard because it's much shorter than this. So this is all the seismic demand is going to be going to this location. It was impossible to just retrofit this enough to become or to be able to take the seismic load. So we're going to build a super band. So this is one of the seismic mitigation option for this structure. With that, thank you for your attention. Appreciate it. I think you're muted. I can't hear.
Sorry, thank you so much. That was really, really great. I've allowed everyone to unmute themselves, so if anyone has any questions right now, feel free to ask, or if you would feel more comfortable to asking a question in the chat, that's fine too.
And I would be willing to stick around a little longer than past 7. So if time is an issue, or I don't know from your side, but I'll be willing to stick around.
James Reedus, you have a question?
Yeah, just about tsunami loading. So do your plans incorporate tsunami loading in general, or effects of coastal inundation or anything like that? Just a curiosity. And yeah.
Yes, tsunami loads will be actually implemented only in the design of the new bridges. And we already have received all the data, wave height, wave velocity for our bridge sites. But the guide spec, and actually I didn't talk about the guide spec, but probably I should, because I think I was spoken earlier before you guys joined this webinar. But ODOT just led a full fund study for developing guidelines for designing new bridges for tsunami loads. It was a full fund study that involved all Western states, including Hawaii, Alaska, California, WashDOT, and ODOT. And we had the support of Federal Highway as well. So the project is complete at this point, and guide specifications are ready for adoption by AASHTO in their next annual meeting, which is going to be next June or June of next year. So the intent of those guidelines is to be used for designing new bridges, and most of the Western states that will be impacted by Cascadia, not necessarily from tsunami induced by Cascadia subduction earthquake, but even from tsunami induced by a distant earthquake. So we'll have 2 levels of tsunami design. But the intent is to be used only for new bridges. I think it's infeasible to grow and mitigate existing bridges for tsunami. First, because the bridge has to sustain the ground shaking first. I mean, we know all bridges along the coastline are not able to sustain an earthquake. So mitigating those bridges that I showed on the screen a little while ago for earthquake and tsunami is not cost effective. So most likely we have to replace those. And that's why the tsunami guidelines are designed for, or are intended for new bridge design only. Did I answer the question, or still is some questions there? Okay. Good.
Here's a question in the chat. Do the benefit cost ratios that you spoke about take into account the probability of an earthquake in the bridge lifetime?
Yes, we actually, I think I mentioned earlier that we are designing our new bridges for performance-based design criteria. So our bridges are expected to survive or to be operational after a Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake, and are expected to not collapse after a 1,000-year return earthquake, which is way beyond the life service of our bridges. But for retrofit, we still are using the same criteria as for new bridges. So yeah, the cost benefit is we're more focused actually having these bridges being serviceable for Cascadia responders. But when we go through design, we evaluate bridges even for 1,000 years. So yeah, it's an earthquake that has 7% probability of occurrence in over 75 years, which for now, that's for how long we design our bridges to be serviceable. But this is going to change, I think, pretty soon. We're just about to implement a 1,000-year service life for our bridges, right? Probably a year or two from now.
Do we have any more questions?
I had a quick question. Is the bridge in the picture here the Spanish Hollow Bridge near Biggs Junction?
That's a good question. That might be, because Spanish Hollow was one of the bridges that was retrofitted.
I worked as a field engineer on this project 2 summers ago. The bridge looked very familiar.
Oh, you did? Okay. That's good to know. So probably you have a lot of pictures already in your computer, I guess. But
Yep.
we just, did you get a chance to meet our folks on Region 4 up there?
Yeah, Riley Scov and
How about Paul Strausser?
yep, Paul Strausser.
Okay. Yeah, Paul just went through the final inspection for the entire corridor and shared some very great images of this project. So it's complete as we speak now, entire project. And probably you know that we had to replace one bridge because beside retrofit needed to be widened as well, and
Yep, added a whole new
cost
lane.
effective to be replaced rather than widening and retrofitting. So
Yep,
yeah,
I
we'll try
went-
to be smart in decision. I mean, some of the bridges still have a lot of years left in their service, but when the bridge is too old and doesn't make sense to retrofit, we definitely are open for replacing those bridges.
Yeah, it was interesting to see how all the bridges, each one had something different happening to it, a different type of retrofitting or a full replacement. And it was kind of to see the logic behind that.
Yeah, whatever makes sense. I mean, we're trying to think outside the box, and we rarely find two bridges that are identical. Most of our bridges are already made.
Thank you.
Well, if that's it, I want to thank everyone for coming. If you're looking for something to do after this, there is IT is hosting a social event on Zoom. I guess there's games and stuff if you need human interaction from being isolated via this COVID world we're living in. I just put that in the chat. But if not, thank you for coming, and thank you again, Albert. That was really nice.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Bye now.
All right. Well, thank you, and have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.